How valuable will Rashee Rice be upon his return to the field in Week 7? That more this week on the couch. Justin Boone, how excited are you to be able to put Rashee Rice back into your lineup?
Very. And we've been waiting on this one a long time. And it's been such an interesting case with him because if you had a winning record over the last few weeks, I was telling everybody, go out there, do everything you can, move mountains to get Rashee Rice on your team. But on the flip side, if you had a losing record, you had to make that tough decision to be like, I got to get rid of him. I got to trade him away for pieces that can help me win now. So I wonder like how many teams have had to make those choices and actually have either gained or lost Rashee Rice since the draft. And yet this guy's going to come back. I think he's going to be a top 15, maybe even top 12 fantasy receiver. We've seen it. And I know it feels like small sample sizes because you think back to last year and he gets injured. But prior to that, he was just killing it. The sixth most targets per game, the third most fantasy points per game. But you go back even further, right? The rookie season, he was a top 15 fantasy wideout over the final 10 games that year, too. So we've seen him do it a bunch of times. I think this Chiefs offense, for as much as they've had ups and downs over the first month or so here, I think they're just waiting for that guy to step in to be that true number one receiver and to kind of push some of the other guys down the depth chart a little bit where maybe they fit better, right? We've seen, I think Xavier Worthy is a great piece on that offense, but I don't think he profiles as the number one there. I think he's going to be much better as that explosive number two option. And Hollywood Brown, such a funny one. I mean, he had a good game this week, but he gets thrust into this volume role in week one because of all the injuries and the suspension. And he had a decent game, but we saw the next couple weeks after that, he's just not that guy, right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to see these guys end up in more of a rotation. Tyquan Thornton, Hollywood Brown being that kind of third receiver, with Worthy as the second, with Rashee Rice coming in and being that true number one. And it's going to be huge for fantasy. And yeah, I think I have one team, and we're actually in the league together. It's
Yeah.
the Reddit Charity League, where I've held on to Rashee Rice despite the fact that I had a losing record. That's the only one where I really need him to help me turn things around. And now Mecca Egbuka's hurt in that league, so he's not even going to give me a boost. He's just going to replace Egbuka. But I have Rashee Rice on a bunch of teams where I managed to keep things afloat and either be 3-3 or have a winning record. And I think he is going to propel me to help win the title potentially in the second half of the season. I think he's going to help a lot of fantasy managers that way.
Yeah, maybe overpay for him. And what I mean is, like you said, top 15 receivers. So, it's a short list of receivers maybe that you shouldn't be willing to trade for him. And you described the evolution of the Chiefs offense, right? Because this is a funny fantasy football thing to get caught up in, because the last 2 years, well, surely the Chiefs offense is going to bounce back this year. Well, surely now this year, look at the moves they've made, and it hasn't happened. So you would have been forgiven for not believing it was going to happen this year. And like you said, when Hollywood Brown's catching 10 balls in the opening game, it's not happening. That's what it looks like when it's not happening. But now Patrick Mahomes really looks like he's on a mission. This is what happens when he loses the Super Bowl, right? He's on a mission. And for fantasy, I would argue he's the most valuable fantasy quarterback right now. I don't think that's really
He's
controversial.
right up there. Like, yeah, he's scoring on par with the elite guys again. And it shouldn't be that shocking because we've seen him do this before.
Right.
Just a few years ago, he was up in that range and then had a couple down seasons where he was like a low end QB1 kind of on the borderline there. And now there was a lot of talk before the season. They were going to try to push the ball downfield
Yep.
more and all this stuff. And the fact that he's been running more is obviously the huge thing. And that was something he did earlier in his career too. That's helping push him back up the fantasy ranks as well. But yeah, he is, if not the top guy, he is right up there in the conversation with the elite guys again, which is all the more reason to be excited about Rashee Rice coming back, because if you have Mahomes playing at this level, now you're going to add that to it. It's just going to lift all boats.
And exactly, because, and you might say that Rice, I think like you said, I mean, he was a number 2 or number 3. It was early in the season, but he was among the top 3 when he went out last year. And well, maybe that was by necessity. No, that means that with this offense more opened up, now Rashee Rice, those targets are going to be more valuable. And just in general, Kansas City's like a force multiplier offense. Like there's a handful of offenses. And Justin, I keep banging this drum, especially for waiver wire pickups and maybe to a lesser extent lineup setting, that we think about this in terms of quality of offense. Whenever we're drafting, we want to get parts of quality offenses, but we don't think about that as much during the season, and we should. And I mean, there's these force multiplier offenses: Kansas City, Detroit, I would argue that Indianapolis basically has become one now,
Agreed.
and because of that, as we go through the bye week gauntlet, you mentioned Tyquan Thornton. I mean, he's still just an Xavier Worthy injury away from really mattering in fantasy football. And then we have to discern this backfield. Any thoughts? Because boy, there's a lot of angles here. I love Brashard Smith, but his snaps have gone back down to 9 each of the last 2 games. So if there was a plan to scale him up, it seems like that plan's been put on hold. Isaiah Pacheco, all of a sudden now getting like 65, 70% of the snaps last week, 4 red zone opportunities, didn't get any touchdowns, but the touchdowns are going to come in this offense, and they will eventually come for running backs at some point. Kareem Hunt had 2 last week, but then there's the trade deadline. We're going to talk about the trade deadline a lot because that's coming up. That plays into it. Breece Hall has been mentioned a lot. So what, if any, angle do you have on the Kansas City backfield right now?
I don't really want to get involved. I mean, if you can get Pacheco cheap, sure, he's the guy to take a shot on. Like you said, snaps going up a little bit, opportunity going up a little bit. And we hope that this offense is going to be in scoring position even more now with Rashee Rice coming back and with them firing on all cylinders. And yet it just seems like this is going to continue to be a committee unless they bring someone in. And even in that situation, if they do go out and get a Breece Hall or a big name like that, don't we still think they're going to have somebody else involved? Do we really think they're going to bring a guy in and play him on 90% of the snaps, 80% of the snaps? That doesn't seem to be what they do in this offense. So I've been frustrated by this all year long. I think if they don't go get anyone else, you're looking at that committee. They're not sending Kareem Hunt to the bench. They're going to continue to have all these guys involved. Brashard Smith will have weeks where he's a little more involved and weeks where he takes a step back.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's going to just be a frustrating situation that I think renders Pacheco and Hunt kind of in that RB3 flex range where you don't feel great about having them in your lineup and you probably feel like you need that touchdown for them to pay off. And Brashard Smith is never going to be the workhorse, right? He was never going to come for this job. It was just a question of whether he could be that Jerick McKinnon kind of role
Exactly.
where he gets a lot of passing game work and that turns him into like a low end RB2 in fantasy. And even then, it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this year. Maybe in the future at some point, but I don't think that's going to happen this season. So the backfield really hasn't been the area that I've tried to invest in this offense, but it all comes down to pricing. Like if you can get Pacheco very cheap, I wouldn't recommend putting him in your lineup, but if you can get him cheaper as a throw in a trade, put him on your bench. Let's see how this thing looks over the next few weeks with Rice back. And then you go from there and you make a decision.
Yeah, be more willing to take chances on players in these offenses. And I think that's something that we can make fantasy football kind of simple, Now, when we look at other offenses that we thought were these force multiplier offenses, I want to ask you about the Eagles because I don't, right? Exactly. I mean, that's the perfect reaction, Justin. That's the perfect reaction. Oh, and we've already gone through. I mean, one of the things I want to emphasize is, again, we're just going into week 7, actually about halfway through the fantasy football regular season. So the clock's ticking. But we've already seen some of these teams have 2, even like 3 acts so far in their season. You think you got a beat on them, and then it changes, and then injuries happen, or something else changes, and a matchup can like light the fuse, or a matchup can destroy their confidence. So we've already seen with the Eagles. Now, we've seen some ups and downs, right? Like Brian Johnson, not so good when he took over the offense. Kellen Moore revives the offense. Kevin Patullo, well, the verdict, we were wondering. The first game, a little bit too committed to the run. Second game, a little bit too committed to the run. Third game, a little bit too committed to the run. Predictable, maybe. And then you see all of the pendulum swing in week 5 where Saquon Barkley only got 6 carries. Now in week 6, frustration. As Jalen Hurts just looks off. A.J. Brown has been unhappy. And Dallas Goedert's been good. Going back to Coach Speak Index, what's up, Greg Branos? You did hear Dallas Goedert say, subject to trade rumors, speaking of trade deadline stuff, in the offseason, he said he was really excited for what Kevin Patullo had in store for him. Apparently, that's catching all the touchdowns. He's got 4 in the last, but otherwise, it's not clicking. I mean, this offensive line, this offense is supposed to be one of the best in the league. Do you think they're going to get this figured out? Lane Johnson, who does not, like, how many times have we ever said Lane Johnson said after the game, because he's an offensive lineman, he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
He keeps his thoughts to himself like a professional. He even said, we're getting kind of predictable. Do you think that that's a sign that, hey, this is just what we're going to get? Because if he's that resigned to it, then we all should be. Or do you think they're going to get this figured out?
I think when you see this many players on the offense upset, and like you said, Lane Johnson is a surprise. I even think Devonta Smith, like he's not the kind of guy that normally looks unhappy, and yet he's sitting on the bench next to AJ Brown. He also looks miserable out there. You just have to wonder. Like it seems like there's normally the Super Bowl hangover is to the team who actually lost the Super Bowl, and they come back and struggle the next year. Now we're seeing the team that won the Super Bowl. How could things be this bad when you're coming off that kind of high with these players with this much talent? I do think a lot of it comes down to the coordinator change, and it does seem stagnant. It does seem like it's different, and it seems like a lot of the players are kind of checking out a little bit on him. Great for Dallas Goedert. Yeah, fantastic that he's back in the top 10 fantasy wise. And yet these other guys, AJ Brown, the volumes creeped up a little bit for him in terms of targets. And yet, production wise, we're not seeing the big games. I think he had that one contest, but other than that, Devonta Smith, same kind of thing, right? We're not seeing these guys have the spiked weeks, and it's not as concentrated if Dallas Goedert is going to be that involved. This isn't the 2024 Eagles. I think we can accept that now. A lot of the blame's been put on the offensive line, though. I don't think it's totally the offensive line's fault because okay, they're not as good as they were in the past, sure, but this isn't now a unit that's making the whole offense struggle, right? Like this unit is still good enough to keep things moving here. So I do think it comes down to the play calling. I'm really worried about Saquon Barkley, and not to continue to talk about my fantasy teams, but in that same Reddit league, I took Barkley and AJ Brown, thinking I was a genius that Brown fell to me and that Barkley fell to me in the first 2 rounds. And yet it is not looking good so far. And that's a big reason why my team does have that losing record so far at 2-4. I'm worried about Barkley to the point where I would try to trade him. Like in that league against other analysts, it's going to be hard to get anything of value. In your home leagues, I think you want to take that name value of Saquon Barkley and you want to try to move off of him if you can. If you can get anything, top 12 RB, top 15 RB, or the same at wide receiver, I would be trying to do that because I just don't think there's going to be as many big weeks. And you look at like last year, right? Like he hasn't broken 100 scrimmage yards in a game this season. Last year he did that 13 times. Like that's not a, close difference. That is a massive difference where we are just not seeing him win you fantasy weeks. We are not seeing him dominate the same way. It's a little bit on the offensive line. I think it's big time on the coordinator change here. And then you wonder, can it change throughout the season? Because you think to like the Carolina Panthers, for example, last year, where Dave Canales comes in. We're very excited about Dave Canales joining the Panthers. Early in the season, things do not look good for them. In the second half of the year, we finally saw them get it going, and the offense looked a lot better. Can that happen here with this year with this kind of talent in this offense? It certainly can, but I think something is going to have to change. And so far, we just haven't seen that thing changing. And it's not like there's a player coming back from injury that's going to save the day. So I'm worried about this offense, and Barkley to me is a guy that I think you want to try to get away from if you can.
Yeah, you outlined well that you should be taking a stand on the Eagles offense one way or the other. We can say for sure that 3, 4, 5 weeks from now, none of these players are going to be worth the same. Either they're going to get it figured out. And I thought after the Rams game, the Rams put them down
Yeah.
26-7, and then Jalen Hurts comes out in the second half and the team storms back. You're like, okay, balance is back. And then they swung too far. And now, like you said, disgruntled. So either the perception and the possibility of this offense getting better creates some value to sell low, or it's time to buy low, but something's going to change in our perception, even if nothing changes in this offense, as this was supposed to be a good offense. And now they're going to face Minnesota this week, coming off a bye, a well rested. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I looked over at the schedule. I have it up next to me here, and yeah, I was doing the exact same thing you were doing. It's the Vikings, it's the Giants, and we just saw how that went. Then it's a bye, and then it's the Packers after that,
Yeah.
which is not a good matchup. So if you're talking about value changing for these guys over the next month or so, where are you going to have that spike game? You're going to hope that one of them goes off against the Vikings or the Giants, I guess, and you can get out on them before the bye. Otherwise, yeah, if your team's struggling and you have some of these Eagles on it, I don't know that we're going to see much different, at least in the next month.
Yeah, do something. Have some. I mean, shake it up. Either trade for some Eagles, trade your Eagles away. We mentioned the Giants a couple of times. So let's just pivot to that because I'm I'm buying Jaxson Dart, and I don't just mean in fantasy. I mean, I thought I saw it in the first game, and then things fell apart against the Saints, and then everybody saw it, in that third game on Thursday night. Are you aggressive or projecting more growth because the arrow is pointing up, or do you think this could be one of the situations we've seen it, Justin? We've seen it where, hey, once the league gets some tape on a guy, about a month in, defenses start to adjust, they start to beat him to the punch. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about Jaxson Dart?
Very optimistic. And I think when the defensive coordinators catch up, I think it normally takes more than a month. Like that can often happen like in the off season before their sophomore year. We might be seeing a little bit of that with Bo Nix right now, right? I think we're going to see Jaxson Dart continue to produce. Now, this week is going to be a great challenge for him going against that Broncos defense that's been shutting down almost everybody. So we'll see if he can produce. But the thing with him has been the floor as well, right? Like he's shown us that he has the floor with the rushing ability. Konami code, shout out Rich Rebar,
Yeah,
but the ceiling is also there. And the fact that he's been able to do it and that he did it against the Eagles, which should have been a tough matchup for him. And I know Jalen Carter was out that game, so the Eagles defense not quite the same when they don't have him. But the fact that he's been able to do it without Malik Neighbors, with just kind of this brand of football he's been playing, which he's a talented guy, but there's also like this like moxie, this like
yes,
change, this the personality change. And I talked about this with Matt Harmon on the fantasy forecast a few weeks back before I really saw this offense hit its stride. The idea that when you're going to have this like culture change, you need those personalities that maybe have a little bit of like irrational confidence, right? Like,
absolutely.
and Jaxson Dart and Cam Scatterbo might have the most irrational confidence I've ever seen in my life. And it's so much so that they are making that Giants team excited. They're believing. And now they're starting to win some games that they shouldn't win. And it's fun in real life, it's fun in fantasy. And on top of that, these guys are producing on the field because Dart, with the rushing ability and with kind of a pretty bad supporting cast,
Right.
I would say, in terms of the pass catchers, is still producing. Cam Scatterbo is getting a ton of volume. A little worried last week. You were thinking, okay, Tyron Tracy's going to be healthy. How is this going to work out? I continue to rank Cam Scatterbo as a top 20 running back because we saw this team believes in him. They were not going to send that personality back to the bench. They weren't going to get rid of the backflips. They really are behind these two guys, and it's been great. And I think this is a spot where you want to buy in, even though the schedule for them coming up here, it's kind of difficult, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not just that game. I'm pulling it up here.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have it in front of you, but like, yeah, it was Philly, then Denver this week, Philly again. I mean, the San Francisco matchup doesn't look as bad now with the injuries they have, but it really seems like those two guys are going to be matchup proof. We're going to see some other guys come along, like Wandale Robinson, who we saw have a good game last week. Theo Johnson at tight end. I know it was a down game for him, but he's a guy that caught a few touchdowns with Jaxson Dart out there. They need him to step up. And we saw during his rookie season, he really flashed and he had some good games for fantasy as well. So we'll see Darius Slayton. Can he get healthy and be a
Mhm.
factor here? This is an offense that I do want to invest in. And I think it's exciting. We saw them in prime time do it, but I still don't think people are valuing these guys the right way. Like Jaxson Dart as a low end QB1 the rest of the season, that is not a crazy thing to say based on the way he's played.
Or better, Justin,
Yeah,
because Scadaboo had 3 touchdowns on the ground last week. If one of those is Jaxson Dart, he was one of the elite plays of the week. And Philly also lost Quinyon Mitchell, so we adjust as we go through the season. Like you said, injuries to San Francisco, injuries to Philly. We'll see. I think it's going to be Carson Wentz. We'll see how the Minnesota
I
offense
do too.
does against Philadelphia. But I like the way you frame that because we are on the couch and I'm the mayor of Narrative Street, et cetera, et cetera. But it's non-football stuff that can change football outcomes and change fantasy football outcomes. And you are seeing now, because the trade deadline, again, hovering over many topics in this show, the Giants are buyers. The Giants want a wide
Yeah.
receiver. It's just like your fantasy team, right? You could say going into the season, dynasty. If you're not playing dynasty, come on. If you're listening to this show, you better be playing dynasty fantasy football because it's the only way you really you put your money where your mouth is, but also it's just so much fun to manage your team. And really, that's when you really play GM. If you really want to play GM, I look at the camera when I say this, Justin. You got to do salary cap contract leagues, but that's for
Yeah.
another show. Right now, I think you're right that Jaxson Dart and Cam Scadaboo have given this team an ethos. They've given this team and Abdul Carter. That's what's exciting about this team is you've got on the other side Brian Burns and what a player he has turned into now that he feels like his team has a chance to win, right?
It's funny how that, changes guys' outlooks, and what a contrast talking about Philly and all the talent they have and yet the attitudes and the guys are upset about the way things are going and how that's kind of dragging them down, despite the fact that you look and you just go, oh my God, these guys are some of the best players in the league,
Right.
and we're not seeing the production from them. And yet the Giants, with this kind of hilarious cast that they have out there without Malik Neighbors, yeah, I would love to see them go out and make a trade for, somebody that I've seen rumors of, like Chris Olave
Right.
potentially. The Saints seem like they're going to be sellers. There's been some reports about that. So could it be Olave? Could it be Rashid Shaheed? Heck, Sig, like my Buffalo Bills, I think they need to make a move. I think they need to go out and get a receiver. And I'm talking about with the Chiefs, how Rashee Rice is going to come back and bump some guys down the depth chart, and maybe put them in spots that they should be in versus where they're being asked to produce now. Wouldn't the Bills really
Yeah.
look good if they went out and got somebody like Chris Olave and put Keon Coleman into what I think he is, which is more of a number two receiver in the pros? Khalil Shakir, that guy in the slot that can make plays, but you're not asking him to be a number one receiver some weeks for you. It would be huge. And yet, after what happened with Amari Cooper last year, are they going to be a little gun shy about doing that?
Yeah.
I hope not. I hope that they realize they have to go all in. They need a receiver. They need a playmaker to shake this thing up because, yeah, I mean, we've seen how they can get kind of stagnant as well in some of these games. And Josh Allen doesn't have that guy that he can rely on. And yet, yeah, he's Superman. He can win a lot of games for them by himself. But we saw the coaching staff, we saw the general manager come out after last night's game and basically say, like, we can't put that much on Josh Allen. We made it too difficult for him in that game. You got to come out and find somebody else who can help. And I hope they do that before the deadline.
Yeah, Jacoby Myers, another name, and not
Yep.
necessarily one that would stretch the field for them, but give them another viable target. And let's shift to the Bills after what we saw. Recording this on Tuesday, I know you all see this on Wednesday, and thank you everybody for we're working to give you the best fantasy football donuts we can. But this is fresh in our minds, like you said, the Bills, and where I'm fascinated, interested as a fantasy football angle, Justin, is the Bills are going into their bye, which, it's a well-timed bye in the sense of Josh Palmer, who actually was finally doing some stuff before he got hurt. I haven't seen much about the
Yep.
severity of his injury. Didn't look great. Looked like he was in pain.
Yeah.
And you see how important Dalton Kincaid is to this offense now. You saw how hard it was. And then once you took Palmer and Kincaid away, this offense was and James Cook was running as well as ever, but this team was kind of like a turtle on their back. And you go back to the Keon Coleman decision. Keon Coleman, Xavier Worthy. I mean, maybe it didn't matter, but could have been Lad McConkey. But you have an offense that, like you said, now everything's getting compressed to the line of scrimmage. Josh Allen, the Joe Brady offense last year, Josh Allen seemed relaxed and things came pretty easy to him, and it was a balanced offense. It's a balanced offense this year, but the running game is probably the better part of the offense right now. So from a fantasy angle, we had one game when the Bills couldn't stop Derrick Henry, so Josh Allen had to be Superman. And if you take that game out, and I know I don't like to play that angle in fantasy, like just take the best game out or the best play
Right.
out, but he's been kind of an ordinary fantasy quarterback since then. Justin, is the buy a chance to cash in on name value, or do we trust the Bills to add some punch to this offense?
I mean, I'd like to think that I'm like the least emotional fantasy player. Like Harmon even gives me a hard time that I show no loyalty to my fantasy assets at all. I will trade anyone on my team. I do not feel married to whatever
Uh,
team I draft. I think you got to shake things up along the way. So I say that to try to remove some of the bias. I know, for the people watching, I have a box of Flutie Flakes over my
yeah,
shoulder. I got a Bills helmet. Like all of that is on the table here when I'm talking about this team. I don't think you sell Josh Allen here, though. And part of it is they just had two, I think, underrated matchups. I think the Patriots defense and the Falcons defense were a lot better than people realized. And I think now coming out of those two games where they've beaten the Bills, that's shown everyone that those defenses are a little bit better. When you talk about his stats, other than the Ravens game, kind of being a little bit down, he wasn't even playing in the fourth quarter. Some of those other games, like it was the matchups too, right? Like you look who they were playing, the Jets, the
yeah,
Dolphins, the Saints. He didn't need to be Superman in those games. Now, I say that coming out of the bye when they regroup, the schedule's not bad. Like they get the Panthers and the Dolphins, two of their next three after that. So I think we're going to see this offense settle down. I think it's going to be okay. I think Josh Allen will be fine. But fantasy wise, it's such an interesting offense to try to figure out because James Cook, Josh Allen, those are the easy ones. Those are the gimmies. the receiving core, like Khalil Shakir is not a guy who's going to help you win your league. He's a guy that you throw into your wide receiver 3 or flex spot, gives you decent production, but you're not really getting a lot of spiked weeks from him. Keon Coleman does not seem to be a guy who's going to emerge as the number one receiver in this offense and really be a difference maker in fantasy. Even Kincaid, I think you have to be a little bit worried about because all the production that he's been coming up with, a lot of touchdowns, he's been great. He's been really producing, and yet he's still doing it on like 50% of the snaps out there. And at what point does that potentially, the bottom fall out of it for him? Does he turn into a pumpkin some weeks because he's not out there on a full-time basis? So that's concerning. I think that's where you look in this offense and start to question that, despite the fact that it is a pretty good unit overall, you just don't have a lot of spots where you're that excited to invest in for fantasy other than Cook, other than Allen, and then maybe grabbing a guy like Ray Davis, who we saw find the end zone
Right.
last night, who I think if Cook went down would be the guy, even though Ty Johnson gets a lot of work out there as well. I think Ray Davis would be the obvious one to step in. And we saw that last year when Cook missed a couple games. We saw Ray Davis step in and put up top 15 fantasy numbers in both of those contests. So he is certainly a stash here as well. But it just all comes back to, in my mind, Sig, trying to go out and the Bills getting someone to add to this receiver core who can be that difference maker, who can help them win later in the season and into the playoffs, and could potentially help fantasy managers find a receiver in this offense that they could get behind as well.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen the Bills have a very successful project of giving the offense a physical edge in the running game. And James Cook, and they signed James Cook, and now and that's important in January. What they had was Josh Allen Superman, and he doesn't have Robin. Would Superman have a sidekick? He doesn't have that sidekick right now, and that Super Bowl clock is ticking. I mean, I'm sure it was painful for Bills fans. Sorry, Justin,
It's okay.
to see Stephon Diggs have a big game against them in that road upset win for New England. And it's interesting too at this point in the season, your fantasy team doing some soul searching, but with the exception of the Chiefs, who already had their rocky time with the losses they had. The Chiefs are the one Super Bowl contender in the AFC that's not doing soul searching right now, right? The Ravens are 1-5. Cincinnati's turned to Joe Flacco, and then Buffalo is losing games that you would expect them to win. Or otherwise, if you see them as a Super Bowl favorite, then they should be more competitive in these games. The team that is now the thorn in their side, you mentioned New England Patriots, because I'm saying, and I mean, we can talk about Josh Allen as a trade candidate, but it doesn't have to be Josh Allen. There are players that are, I mean, buy low, sell high. I've been writing in that column for a long time at Football Guys, but it's now it's too late for that. The fantasy football community is too smart. Now you're buying high and selling low. Really, where people aren't anticipating that it can actually get better. Can it get better for Drake Maye? And if it does get better for Drake Maye in this Patriots offense, who is he taking with him?
I don't know how much better it can get. Like, he's basically a top 5 fantasy quarterback already. Can he join the elite guys by the end of the season? Maybe. He looks fantastic. He's playing with a lot of poise out there. It looks like they have a nice thing going with his offensive coordinator and him. This is something that could potentially continue for a while here. So that kind of stability that a lot of other young quarterbacks we're seeing don't necessarily have, he could potentially have that moving forward, which is huge for him. I love this for them. I know as a Bills fan, I'm supposed to hate the Patriots, and for years, I will be honest, I never drafted the Tom Brady's and the Gronks because I was bitter. But this version of the Patriots, I'm excited to see them do well with a great young quarterback who's doing a lot of like Josh Allen-esque
Yes.
things, right? He's spreading the ball around. He can run. He's really coming through for fantasy in a lot of the ways that Allen did early in his career. Now, I think in terms of the other players in that offense, it's not necessarily the best thing, though, because like we're talking about with Buffalo, he's spreading the ball around it. We saw Diggs have a couple good games. We're not seeing him play full-time snaps yet, but we know the kind of player he is. And I do think he is going to be the number one guy in this offense. He's going to produce more often than not for fantasy. But in terms of going after like the Kayshon Booties and the Demario Douglases, like those are two guys that had great games this week for fantasy. I don't think it's going to be consistent enough that you can throw these guys in your lineup aside from deep leagues, bye week replacements, risky flex plays. I don't think it's going to be a week in, week out thing for those receivers. I think really in this offense, you're looking at Drake Maye, you're looking at Stephon Diggs, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but you're
Yes.
looking at Ramondre
Yes, that's
Stevenson
the
as
guy.
the guy who is the lead back, who's the guy that they trust no matter what he's doing, no matter how many times he fumbles, they're going to continue to go back to him. And it's unfortunate. And normally I don't like tap out on rookies at this point in the season because so often we see people do that. And then later in the year, they break out. But with Henderson, with Travion Henderson, I'm not seeing anything. I'm not even seeing like the highlight that gets you a little bit excited that when he gets more opportunity, he's going to be able to go off. He's gotten a little more opportunity now. He's gotten some more touches. He's not really doing much with them. So, barring a Ramondre Stevenson injury, I don't really know that Henderson is going to emerge and take over this backfield at any point. And if people are waiting on that like post, bye week rookie bump, his bye week isn't until week 14. So you're going to be waiting a long time for that. You're going to be waiting until the fantasy playoffs. And at which point, I don't think you're going to throw him in your lineup then. So Henderson is somebody that I'm pretty out on. I don't think you can get much for him. I've been saying for weeks, you put him on your bench, you see how this plays out. But based on what we've seen in the last few weeks and Antonio Gibson going down, being out for the season, that should have been a spot where he could get more work. And he's not. He's still
No.
making some of those rookie errors, and the coaching staff clearly is dinging him for that. And that's why they keep leaning on Stevenson. So, yeah, Henderson is somebody that I'm almost willing to drop at this point because you're holding him just to be that injury away guy. If you're holding him hoping that he's going to take over this backfield, I don't think that's going to happen. So, if you can get something for his name value, if someone still believes in him, do it. But right now, he's almost like, that sabotage drop. I've heard you use
Exactly.
that before, right? He's
Yes.
almost that kind of guy that you want to drop him in order to let somebody else get excited and have him and maybe even throw him in their lineup. And it's not going to work out, I don't think, unless Stevenson gets hurt.
Yeah, I think you hit on the most important things, which is try to get Ramondre Stevenson. There was a play, as we do this thing where we pay. Cecil says it well. My wonderful friend and co-host Cecil Lemmy
Yeah.
says, "You have a life, we don't." So we're paying attention to everything, right? And there was a game earlier this season when Stevenson had like 5 catches for 88 yards. I think it was a game like in September, and I remember the coaches said that he had a big play downfield when May extended the play a little bit and he was running down the sidelines. And they said they practiced the play with Henderson
Yeah.
and then Stevenson made the play in the game. And something twitched inside of me like, ooh, that might be important. And I think you're right to say that they just don't trust Henderson, and Henderson's not giving them a reason to say, look at what we're missing. Now, I say that, and you could have said the same thing about Omarion Hampton. And then as soon as Najee Harris got hurt, all of a sudden, Omarion Hampton turned into a juggernaut, and then he got hurt. But I want to talk about sabotage drops because that was a topic for this week. Paul, heads up, tip of the cap to Paul Charchian, who coined that term. And I think it gets into the layers of fantasy football strategy that are really fun. And you mentioned playing emotionally. I'm a massive proponent of playing emotional fantasy football. And in fact, I feel kind of bad because Cam Scadaboo is the kind of player that I should have loved. I just kind of fell in love with the Tyrone Tracy, David Johnson comparison, and
Yeah.
Brian Dable saying he's bigger, he's faster, he's quicker. I'm like, geez, if he's bigger, faster, and quicker, he seemed like he arrived ahead of schedule last year. He was supposed to be a project, and he was already their lead back by the end of the year. So, and Scadaboo is a fun player. But in hindsight, like the way Cam Scadaboo makes you feel when you watch him play the game, like that's what we're trying to tap into. We're trying to share in that greatness in fantasy football. And otherwise, and there is such a thing as emotional intelligence. Your emotion can be telling you things. One of the things I say is like when you're watching a player the first few weeks, Justin, like you've been doing all your draft prep, and something in you is annoyed. Like you're watching someone play well, and you're like, "That's annoying me." Chances are that's persistent because you don't want it to be true, and something inside of you knows it's true. But in emotional fantasy football, there's also a chance to make a release, literally and figuratively, when you do a sabotage drop. And in the waiver wire game, the waiver wire dance, we're always talking about like you can move on from these players. But where it gets really fun is when you drop players, maybe that it's not time to move on from. From a waiver wire buck standpoint, you can get people to spend most of their wallet, but you can also be a thorn in their side. I've used that. I don't know if I haven't been picking roses, but I keep thinking about thorns because Justin, because, like you said, they clog up the roster. They present potentially an attractive lineup choice that they stub their toe on. So I'm going to toss up some players, and I want you to tell me whether you would drop them again as a release some frustration, but also maybe frustrate some of your opponents. First one up,
All right.
Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think you're dropping him at this point. Hopefully, like there's been a lot of quarterbacks that have come on, like a Jaxson Dart. I think Sam Darnold's playing way better than expected in that offense. He's had some really good performances, low end QB1 kind of stuff. Fields, I think you want to get out on because before the season, when we were talking about, okay, when he's been a starter, he has been a QB1 for fantasy, he has the rushing ability. But right before the year, when there was like all the talk about he was struggling in practice and the team was kind of upset about him, I ended up moving him to the back end of that kind of big chunk of quarterbacks that were like from QB10 to QB16 or so. I moved him to the back end because I thought hearing that in the summer told me there might be a higher chance that he actually does get benched at some point during the year. And I think we're getting pretty
Yeah.
close to that, right? We're seeing everyone in the press conferences ask about it. We're seeing the coaching staff get mad about it. And we're just seeing poor play on the field. And even the games where he's going off, he's doing it in garbage time. So fantasy wise, we're okay with that. But in real life, the team is not going to put up with this forever, especially when you have a veteran backup like Tyrod Taylor who can come in and maybe keep the trains on track, maybe keep the offense moving enough and do some of the things that Fields can do as a runner still, even at his age. So I think we're getting a little closer to
Yeah.
that potentially happening. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I would get out on Fields because his projection week to week on a lot of sites is going to be good, right? People
Yeah.
are going to see that and they're going to put it in their lineup, like you're saying. And yet we know that for 3 quarters at least, their projection for the week is going to look very, very bad. They're going to be in the red, and maybe you hope that he comes through after that in the fourth quarter. But yeah, I would be out on Fields and I'd be dropping him.
It's a recipe for destruction of your lineup, like he was last week, because the Jets defense is playing better. Garrett Wilson's going to be out for a few weeks. Like you said, Aaron Glenn is getting frustrated that people are even asking him about benching Justin Fields. At some point, your team will stop playing for you, especially as a first year head coach, when they don't feel like their quarterback gives them a chance to win. And like you said, there's been some false starts. Like the first week against the Steelers, he actually made some throws on extended plays, because that's what I noticed about him at Ohio State that bothered me, was that as soon as the play broke down, he wasn't thinking pass. He was thinking run. He wasn't comfortable attacking as a passer outside of structure. You saw some signs of that against the Steelers. Well, the Steelers defense just had a really bad first week. You thought maybe the running game would get better because of the threat of Justin Fields as a runner. Brees Hall, 22 carries for 59 yards. You know, if Brees Hall gets traded, Justin, we may find out that everything Brees Hall's done is like on his own talent. And when he's in a real offense, like say the Chiefs, um, wow. So, you know, again, if you want to do something fun, getting out ahead of the trade deadline, maybe buy Brees Hall and see what happens there. But you can see that Justin Fields, and hey, he may have a big game because he may bust off a 70-yard touchdown run, and then someone's going to put him in, and then he's going to get shut down or maybe even benched in the fourth quarter. So you're absolutely right, because it was a garbage time game against Dallas, which was one of the worst defenses in the league. You know, Bryce Young had a good game against them. Okay, sabotage drop. Candidate number 2, Chase Brown.
Man, as a drop, that is tough, right? Because you would hope that there's going to be some better weeks. Flacco coming out there, on a short week there, getting there, learning things on the fly, and having an okay game, showing us what he could potentially be in better matchups. There's a chance that Chase Brown does come on as the season goes along. So I think he's still more of a trade candidate. I
Okay.
think you could probably get something for him. I don't know that I could sign on to just completely drop him at this point. And yet we're seeing Samaje Perine get involved in that backfield a little bit more. This is not the big workload that we expected for Chase Brown. And it's just not the same offense that we expected before the season. So I think he's looked okay out there. I think the problem has been the offensive line has underperformed. Obviously, Burrow not being there. It's a different environment than what we projected before the season, but I still think he's more of a trade away candidate than he is a complete
That's
drop.
fair. That's fair. I mean, maybe short bench leagues. You know, those leagues you have like 5 bench
Fair.
spots.
Yep.
You know, like if it's like, well, the only way I can pick up Kimani Vidal is to drop Chase Brown. I mean, drop Chase Brown. Well, and the thing is, you mentioned Samaje Perine. That's a player that folks need to be aware of, especially in leagues. I mean, I don't know about you, Justin, but I look at the waiver wire at running back in some of my leagues, like our league you mentioned together, the Stacked League. What's up, Jeremy? Rhetoric putting together a wonderful charity league for us. Um, they made not much out there, not much. And Samaje Perine is probably out there. And the interesting thing about Perine is, if you think about like the motorcycle and the sidecar. I think I just learned the word for like pillion or something like that. You know, the classic motorcycle and the sidecar, like the Joe
Yep.
Flacco's got like the aviator helmet, and who's in that sidecar? Doesn't it seem like it should be Samaje Perine as like his personal protector, as somebody who can bust off some runs out of the shotgun, who can catch? So I'm fascinated with Perine in this offense.
Isn't that kind of what we're seeing in Pittsburgh too, where you have like the veteran quarterback who's like, I want Jalen Warren, I want Kenneth Gainwell out here protecting me. I don't want the rookie who clearly in the summer we got reports that he was not showing well in pass protection. It's the same kind of thing, right? Like, yeah, having that veteran presence next to you is just a stabilizing factor in the backfield for a veteran quarterback that I said when like they brought in Flacco, one of the biggest things I'm worried about is he going to be able to stay
Yeah.
upright for a whole season? We've seen Joe Burrow get hurt multiple times behind that line. Is Flacco being the statue that he is going to be able to stay healthy behind that line? I don't think so. I think it's going to be really fun for however long he can stay healthy, but I worry about Flacco going down at some point to injury as well.
Yeah, I think that he got the ball out quickly. And an interview I saw with him really stuck with me, Justin, where they basically asked him, like, why are you still playing football? And he said something to the effect of he just loves being a football player and he knows that he's not going to be able to be a football player forever. So if that's what's fueling him, that becomes fun, and fun can create. We saw him do this a couple of years ago with the Browns. So yeah, when he's not facing a defense like the Packers, it's going to be interesting to see what Joe Flacco can do. You also saw, by the way, I thought this was fascinating too. Mike Tomlin's annoyed, right? Did you see that quote, Justin?
Yeah.
Then Mike Tomlin's like, I don't know why your team in your division needs a quarterback and you trade one. I don't, and you thought he was good enough to start week one. I don't. So that tells me Mike Tomlin's like, oh man, now I got to prepare for
Yeah.
Joe Flacco again. Now I got to worry.
And
Yeah,
just breathing life into Jamar Chase
yeah,
and T. Higgins, who are big problems, right, for any team that they're going up against if they have a quarterback that can get them the ball, which Chase Brown was struggling, or Chase Browning, or sorry, Chase Brown, Jake Browning was struggling
yeah,
to do there. But also, I feel bad for Jake Browning because we saw him perform pretty well a couple years ago when he got a starting opportunity. And then this year, what a murderer's row of
yeah,
defenses
yeah,
he has to go against. And then Flacco gets to come in. He's okay against the Packers. And now the schedule is going to get easier for him. But regardless, for fantasy, it's very exciting. Even though Mike Tomlin's mad about it, we're excited about having Joe Flacco there and getting some real value out of Chase and Higgins the rest of the
yeah.
way.
We should be excited about it because Mike Tomlin is annoyed. And as quickly as a Steelers homer, I want to actually say, and this is where it's not the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the oncoming train, Justin. You mentioned it, so I want to bring it up again. I'm kind of excited about the Steelers offense. I mean, I kind of feel like Aaron Rodgers gets Arthur Smith. He gets the playbook, right? He understands the why. He understands the design, and he's executing that well. The offensive line is playing so much better. That's massive. God, it's been so long since we could say the Steelers had a decent offensive line. You mentioned the backfield. I think both Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell are buys right now. I think this offense could become good enough that they're both flex plays against the Bengals, maybe both running back twos, because they did score 3 field goals in addition to the 2 touchdowns against the Browns. This is a pretty decent Browns defense, you know. What's that going to be? We'll have a counterpoint against the Bengals coming up here in a couple of days. They're getting DK Metcalf speed involved, even though they don't really have much of a vertical passing game. They're getting Darnell Washington involved, who improves the running game, and he sneaks up on them in the pass game. I'm actually excited. This is your chance to say, I'm irrational because the Steelers offense, it's still old man Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith.
No, I think it's so condensed too that there's just a handful of guys that you're going to want for fantasy, but they're producing pretty well in DK Metcalf and the backs there. And the tight end room has just turned into a complete nightmare going from the two tight ends, which we thought was going to be a problem, to now the three tight ends, which is an even bigger problem. And I will admit, like, one of the things that I got wrong in terms of like my projections before the season, I really thought that the Arthur Smith, Aaron Rodgers thing was going to end in just disaster. I thought we were going to, around this time of the year, we were going to have both of them going to the media and saying
Mm-hmm.
things behind each other's backs and all that sort of stuff. And no, it's going pretty well. It seems like everybody's on the same page and just sort of like understanding that Rodgers might not have many of these opportunities left. And this is how this team could potentially win. A lot of veterans still on that squad. So yeah, I will take the L in terms of I
Oh yeah.
thought the Rodgers to Pittsburgh was going to be a big problem, and yet it's working out pretty well for them. And we're getting some decent fantasy numbers from the guys that can actually produce here, which, like I said, is DK Metcalf and the backs, and you're pretty much staying away from everything else.
Yeah, like you said, I'm the running joke on our show is that I'm a neurotic Steelers fan, so it skews all my fantasy analysis about the Steelers. But then also, I want to believe, I want to give my heart to my team. So maybe that's what's happening now. But like you said, with Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith, especially after how it went for Aaron Rodgers in with the Jets. But you saw something. Speaking of the Jets, after that Week 1 game, and this kind of comes back to what I was saying about Flacco, where maybe it's a relief for Aaron Rodgers just to be a football player again and not to be the center of attention and not for everyone to be talking about his personal life. It's actually been quiet, which for him, I think, helps him just concentrate on football and reminds him how much he loves football. A couple more things to touch on before we go off the rails real quick. Kimani Vidal, we saw this with Woody Marks, who I still think might have some run, by the way. Don't give up on Woody Marks. But with Kimani Vidal, this seems more decisive. Is it going to stick?
It's going to stick. I think the fact that O'Marion Hampton apparently is going to be out more than the 4 weeks. I think now they can potentially give Vidal like a little bit of a runway here and see if he can do this. And yeah, I think there's a reason we were, at least I was, very excited about him last year. I think a lot of people in the fantasy community were. He's somebody that if he gets that opportunity, he can produce. I'm happy to say, and I will admit that I very much said we didn't know how it was going to go. It could be a hot hand scenario. But last week when I did the waiver wire, I had Kimani Vidal as the pickup over Hassan
Yeah.
Haskins because if he got into the lead back role, the ceiling was just much, much higher for him, where Haskins was going to get what was blocked, but he wasn't going to do much more than be that kind of grinder who's hopefully going to score a touchdown or two for you. And we saw this play out that they got out there. Kimani Vidal runs away with the opportunity. Haskins on the touches he got did not do much. So all the reports that they could potentially trade for someone. I think this gives them an opportunity now to say, okay, let's see if Vidal can actually handle this job for however long Hampton is going to be out. And the matchups are going to get tougher for sure. And we saw this happen with the Cardinals backfield, right? Where they get a very easy matchup when the backups step in. And then as the matchups get a little more difficult, I think we're not going to see the same kind of production. So, no, it's not going to be what we saw from Vidal last week every single week. I think he's still like that high end RB3, but there is some upside like he showed in the last game. So I think he's the top waiver wire ad this week for sure. I would be fairly aggressive in trying
Yeah.
to get him, not as aggressive as people should have been going out and getting Trey Benson, who I think would have had a lot more success if he didn't get hurt, or even like Woody Marks, I
Yeah.
thought was someone that had a better chance to take over that job and handle it for the rest of the year. I said the bid on him when that happened that week needed to be a little bit lower than a Trey Benson because there was the possibility that he could turn back into a pumpkin. And yes, of course, that's what happened there. So Vidal, I think, is going to be productive in this offense where defenses have to make sure they're accounting for that passing game. So yeah, I think he is going to be a pretty good fantasy play, but keep expectations in check. Don't go crazy. What everybody saw last week is not necessarily going to
Yeah.
be the ceiling every week. He's going to be more of that RB3 that gives you some good production. So as your RB2 as a flex option in your lineup, I think he is a good play, and I would be trying to definitely get him because apparently he's going to give you maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks of production here before we see Hampton back.
Yeah, and some of these other players too that Rico Dowdle. I think that it applies to Kenneth Gainwell. I think it applies to Kendrick Bourne. It may apply to Keishon Butte, but even though it's not so much injuries with him, where we say like, oh, we are too convinced that the value is temporary. When you see it emerge, that is maybe the most important factor in deciding how much to bid. I mean, but with Kamani Vidal, really quick, and I know this doesn't come out until Wednesday, Thursday, so waiver is over. But I like to remind people we usually only get 3, maybe 4 true impact players on the waiver wire in each year. And when I say impact, I mean you can start them for 3 or 4 weeks. I don't mean they change your season. So whether it's Woody Marks or Trey Benson or Kamani Vidal, when it's even just possible, I think you act accordingly. If you hold that number 1 pick or you have that wallet full of bucks, and is it the time to empty it? I mean, what are you waiting for? Really, last quick before we go, to the Rails. Anything else? And again, Matt Harmon, my nephew, and Justin Boone, and what they're doing. You've been doing great work for years in the fantasy space. It's great to see you get that space with Matt Harmon over at Yahoo. Anything else while you've got the couch's attention that you want to tell people, scream from the rooftops to the fantasy crowd?
I think the Panthers offense in the second half of the season here is going to be really interesting to watch what they do. And it starts with the backfield, trying to figure out what's going to happen there. I don't think they're going to go away from Chuba Hubbard. Everybody wants Rico Dowdle to, take over and be the guy there. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the odds of them taking a captain like Chuba Hubbard and putting him on the bench or making him the second guy, pretty unlikely, but I do think this is going to be a pretty solid backfield that can produce, where it's going to be more of a 50-50 committee. We might see some hot hand weeks happen there. But last season, I referenced this earlier in the show. Last season, we saw in the second half of the year, the Panthers offense started to gel. They started to produce a little better. They looked a lot more competent. I think we might see that this year. And I think a big reason for it is Jalen Coker is coming
Yes,
back.
boom.
Jalen Coker last season, right? You look at what he did. You take away that first game where he only played 10% of the snaps. So I'll remove that. Didn't have a lot of production in that one. You just look at his other games, you put him on pace for a whole year. He was on pace for like 800 yards. Like, I don't think people realize how talented this guy is. And we've brought up Harmon a few times, reception, perception, all the great work he does on receivers. This is a player that he really likes as well. I think you always have to remember that when we're talking about receivers. If Harmon's in on the guy, that is another data point to look at him in a positive light and to potentially go pick him up. And right now, he's available in the vast majority of
Yeah.
leagues. I think he's only rostered in 12% of leagues. We'll see when waivers run, like you said, this week, what it looks like. But this is a player that could come in and give them that true number two option in the passing game. And I think when you're trying to figure out offenses or things that could change throughout the year, you need that different variable. This is the different variable. They haven't had that true second receiver, that true second playmaker. Coker can give them that. We know Tedero McMillan is a real number one option, a top target there. That can make Bryce Young start to feel more comfortable and produce better. Now he's got the backfield and the depth there. I think this offense could be very exciting, and I think could be one that people really want to invest in for the rest of the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Bryce Young making plays with pocket presence, extending the play. So a little shortened. We'll be talking to Justin again many times in the future, I'm sure, to touch on these things. But off the rails, I mean, there's a little. I sense a little north of the border. I know that. How is it being a diehard NFL fan as a Canadian?
Well, I grew up on a border town, so I feel like, things weren't that different when we crossed the border. It felt very much the same. I grew up near Buffalo, Niagara Falls, born and bred, and I was at a very impressionable age when the Bills were going to the Super Bowl and losing every year. And
Oh,
little did I know, if I became a fan, that they were going to be bad for about 20 years after that before they got good again. But that's why I appreciate Sig, that now, even though they make the playoffs and they have these heartbreaking losses, I will take that any day over the years where they had no chance.
yeah.
So it's been good in that way. I think being a football fan up here is very similar, probably to being a football fan in the US. And I was very lucky career wise that coming out of school, I got a job in the CFL. I was the staff writer for the Hamilton Tiger Cats
Wow.
in the CFL. And I stepped out of school and a few weeks later was standing on the sidelines at professional football practice, even though it wasn't NFL, and getting to kind of learn how teams work at that level and getting to talk to guys in the front office and the training staff and everybody. And that's stuff that, like, I still use to this day
Sure.
when we see different quotes come out from coaches and GMs and stuff. I can draw on, like, oh, I remember when the coaches and GMs talked that way, but they actually meant this and not that, with, that sort of thing. So I've been really, really lucky career wise, and I've worked hard. Don't get me wrong, but I've been very fortunate along the way to end up at different spots that have given me opportunities to cover the NFL and then to step into the fantasy space. And, Yahoo this year, we were talking before the show, it was a big decision for me to leave my last job after 12 years. And yet I couldn't be happier. Yahoo has been fantastic. It's an awesome platform. I'm working with great people there. We talked about Harmon a bunch. Shout out Scott Pianowski over there as
Oh,
well, a
yeah,
Patriots
OG,
fan.
yeah.
before the season, one of his bold predictions was the Patriots are going to win 10 games and make the playoffs, and we kind of questioned it. And now it's looking like a pretty good bold prediction there. So yeah, it's been a great crew. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens the rest of the season. I'm excited to see the things that we can do at Yahoo.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm glad that Yahoo's leaned into fantasy football now. I've always said that professional football in the United States, even college football in the United States, it gets our tribalism out in an innocuous way, mostly like 99% innocuous. And Buffalo, oh man, I mean, and Buffalo sets the standard for mayhem, insanity in the parking lot, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, we paint our faces, we roast meat, we beat drums and loud, make noise and all that stuff. Is it the same in Canada, or is like the national soul of Canada doesn't really need that?
There's not as much of a crazy tailgate, and I say that as I used to be a Bills season ticket holder at one point, so I got to enjoy a lot of those tailgates. In Canada, maybe as people would expect, I don't feel like it's as aggressive when you're talking about the tailgating, and the fandom and the support is certainly there, but I always reference I went to back when they had the World Cup of Hockey, I went to Montreal for it, and I went to a game between Canada and the US, and the vibe I thought was going to be very confrontational. And yet it was this like friendly atmosphere. Everybody was enjoying it, shaking hands, buying each other drinks. And the crowd just was not in like this fighting mode where I've been to Bills games where there were Patriots fans running across the aisle and throwing punches and
Yeah.
things like that, right? A totally different environment there. And I'll relate it to the fantasy industry, Sig, because like
Mhm.
I thought coming into the fantasy industry, it was going to be this cutthroat competitive thing where I was going to have to fight tooth and nail to kind of work my way up. And yet, everybody like yourself, like other analysts I've met, everyone is so friendly. I got a chance to go to the Fantasy Expo in Canton this summer, got to meet so many people that I had been like online friends with and done shows with before, hadn't met in person. And everyone is just so kind, so generous, so supportive. I've tried to emulate that and give that right back as well. Like on my old show, I would always bring young analysts who I thought were
Mhm.
doing good work on to try to promote them. It's such a great community to be a part of, and yeah, I just feel very very appreciative of kind of everything that's happened, and getting a chance to come on the show with you as well is one of those things.
Yeah, gratitude is a vitamin for your soul. It's always good. And I've always said that the fantasy football world, actually one of the more positive, supportive places on the internet, community wise. And since fantasy football went from Dungeons and Dragons with football players to an industry, I think everyone has learned that just like in fantasy football, right? When the pie gets bigger, even if your slice is smaller, you're going to get fed. And as we talked about for the show, and I bring up often, and we're on the couch as I'm about to wind up, I do think that fantasy football and the rise of fantasy football, one of the big elements is curing loneliness. You know, we're keeping people company, and they're keeping us company, and we're keeping ourselves in each other's lives, and that it is about the friends you make along the way. I know that's some sort of silly cliche, but it is about the friends you make along the way. And we do find, as we interact with the people that support us and make our jobs possible, and as we interact with each other, that we have a lot to offer in terms of just I think one of the neatest things about fantasy football is everybody has their own individual way of attacking it, right? It's this asymmetrical amorphous problem. And then you don't need to tear people down or be in competition with other analysts. You just need to come from your place, and you're going to draw your people, and everyone's going to be happy. And I'm so glad that we've reached that kind of point. And thanks to you've been doing great for a while. Everybody, like you said, kind of comes into the industry and just understands like we're not competing. It's better for everybody, and it's more attractive when we're friends, and it's more fun along the way. It's more fun with all of y'all, and you own this vibe, this space as much as I do, because I'm just serving back to you what you give to me, what people like Justin and my nephew Matt Harmon and everyone else does. So much positivity, so much gratitude for you, and hopefully for what we can do for your fantasy teams, because you're so classy.